You guys can ask Jesse questions, which is a great thing. And you also get a microphone again. And I would like to ask everyone, the only one that grabs a mic tonight is me. So don't grab the mic like this. Just speak into the mic politely. Thank you very much. I saw a question in front here for Jesse.
You've worked at Guerrilla Games. How did you like working there? And
well, I think I can describe that best by going on about how many times I actually applied at Guerrilla, because it was 5 times. It was only hired the 5th time. Like, I desperately wanted to get in Guerrilla. And looking back, the first few times my attempts were pretty ridiculous. Like, the first time I applied, they were actually still called Lost Boys Games, and they had this thing where they gave all their employees red bikes, right? Like, and so I think my first application letter was something along the lines of, wow, you know, like, the red bikes are so amazing, blah, 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 blah. I just desperately wanted to get in and try to latch on to anything that would sort of get me past the first hurdle. That never worked. Yeah, I just kept trying. Guerrilla is amazing. For anybody that entertains that idea of working there, it is an awesome studio. In many ways, very unique in what they do and how they do it as well. Yeah, it's a great studio.
all right. Thank you.
All right, any other questions to my left?
Yeah, I was just wondering, what did you do to improve your drawing skills?
Well, effort certainly. You know, just doing the same thing over and over again, many times. It's important to sort of realize that as you start your career, you have, like, regardless of what it is you do, you're more likely to have a lot of time at your disposal. Certainly more than you will a few years further down the line. And so what I did was just like, I did some pretty intense grinding, if you will, in the first few years of my career. At the same time, especially when it comes to drawing, I personally don't necessarily believe in mileage for the sake of mileage, right? Like, I'm not like guys that have piles of sketchbooks full of content. Like, I believe it is just as important to think critically about what it is you're doing, right? Like, and to be very aware of, you know, what ideas do I want to convey, and not necessarily how do I want to convey them. I certainly don't think that I'm sort of, you know, like, just sort of painting skills-wise, I'm on par with any of my colleagues at Bungie, right? Like, those guys are amazing painters. They have amazing, like, real-life paint skills as well, which I've never even done. But the point is, right, like, what I think sort of allows me to still work with those guys is because, like, the ideas that I deliver are on par with theirs, right? Like, that's really important. It's not necessarily just drawing skills. It's the ideas that you want to convey, and making sure that the quality of those is good is just as important, really.
Could you give an estimation? Let's say you get a new question to work on something. How much time do you spend on thinking of the idea compared to actually conveying the idea and
That's actually a good question. Well, that depends greatly on sort of what it is, right? Like, inevitably, if you work on a game like Destiny, which is so incredibly big, there's going to be things that are incredibly straightforward, right? Like, we all have our sort of occasional crate tasks where we get to design crates, and, well, design another crate. Sure, that happens, and that's incredibly straightforward.
How long do you think about that crate?
Not a very long time.
Okay.
5 minutes?
Okay.
No, not 5 minutes. But certainly not very long. But if you're talking about, like, you know, what is a compelling end space for a very important activity, right? Like, there has to be some narrative to that. That has to click with things that go before it. It has to potentially tie into some of the investment rewards, right? Like, so that means
you take a holistic approach.
Yeah, totally,
to the design.
Totally. Yeah, yeah. You know, like, that's really important. I believe concept art is for AAA games, or actually concept art in general. It's sort of the lubricant of the production process, right? Like, it needs to make everything work better a little bit. And so in order to do that, it actually needs to be exposed to all elements of the game, and all it's not just environments this or characters that or gear X or vehicles Y. You know, like all of that matters. Like it's all important and
Complete package.
yeah, totally. And you know, concept artists need to work with all of that information that exists in order to create something that that is compelling. The good thing about being a concept artist is because you're effectively entirely detached from the production pipeline, it is possible to have this holistic overview and to see everything in a much broader view than like an actual production artist working on something like effects will be, or like ground textures or something like that.
Cool, thanks. Over there, someone desperately wants to ask a question. Go ahead, man.
Yeah, you asked, you said a lot of stuff about being a single sentence image.
Yep.
Why? Why does it has to be a single sentence?
Well, that's a good question. I probably should have touched on that. There were a bunch of examples in there in that talk that I gave earlier that sort of showed what I thought weren't good examples, but they were other IPs, and that's a sensitive thing, so I cut them out. Basically, what I mean by that is that if you have to use more than a single sentence to describe your scene, it's probably too complicated. That's what it is, right? Like it's really sort of, you know, forcing yourself to simplify your message to the actual minimal degree, right? Like to strip away all the stuff that ultimately doesn't really matter and to focus on what is really important. And yeah, basically just minimalism in your design.
Refocus or something.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Cool.
Thank you.
Anyone else maybe to the left?
Yeah, you said you pretty much dismiss student portfolios right away. What do you recognize a student portfolio by?
I don't dismiss student portfolios. What I dismiss is schoolwork. So if someone gives me a portfolio that consists of just schoolwork, that's when I dismiss it. It's because, right, like at some point you get students from the same sort of educational institutions and you kind of know what their curriculum looks like. And so, you know, this started in Delft even. Like when I was working in the Netherlands still, I would still get the occasional portfolios from students in Delft. And they followed the same courses that I had myself. So I saw the same vacuum cleaners. And that is an immediate red flag. Like this person is not invested enough to present me his own ideas and like things that he or she personally believes in herself. And that is super important for like a concept artist. Like you have to think outside the box. The worst possible trap you can fall in is to travel down sort of the beaten path and do what other people have done before you.
Cool. Anyone else with a question? There in the back. Someone's coming around the pole.
Yes, I wrote it down here because I'm kind of nervous. Would you consider yourself to be a better designer / concept artist because you work in a team, opposite to being freelance? And if so, did you ever consider yourself going freelance, or when?
It's another really good question. I think subconsciously I avoided being a freelancer. Like I like being exposed to, you know, a whole wide range of different disciplines, predominantly because you'll find that, you know, a lot of the times those people will have better ideas than you do, right? Like, and so at some point my job basically becomes accumulating all of that information that exists out there already and put it together in a package that is easy for everybody to understand. That is ultimately one of the things I believe is most fun about you know, working in a studio. Certainly, freelancing is absolutely also a worthwhile endeavor. But again, I guess it also kind of comes down to sort of what kind of individual you are, right? Like, I like working in studios. I like working with other people. I like empowering my guys to sort of, you know, do the things they so desperately want to do. But certainly, like, I mean, some of those guys, what they want to do is just put their headphones on all day and just paint without ever talking to anyone, right? Like the less exposure they have to meetings and things like that, the better. So yeah, that really depends on the individual. I guess I'm just more of a person that likes to, you know, that likes the contact with these other disciplines.
All right, thanks.
All right, to our right, the guy next to the girl that said yay.
Have you ever thought about doing concept art for motion pictures, or are you specifically attracted to games, or why is that?
Well, I actually did some film work as a freelancer a little bit. You know, it wasn't a lot, but film is very different. It's very different from what I always believed it would be. And I also think that I started doing concept art at a point in time where, in my opinion at least, and this is a very personal opinion, but like I found that, you know, in the sort of at the first decade of the century, so many things in films that were done that were new were reliant on new technology, right? Like new features. I remember very clearly first seeing Lord of the Rings, right, with all those massive armies. That blew my mind, amazing. I think we kind of got to the point now where basically everything we want to do is possible in one way or another, right? Like there's certainly things that, you know, will prove me wrong to some extent in the years to come, but really, I think so much is possible now. Whereas in games, if I think about everything that's still impossible, that blows my mind, right? There's so much things in games that we haven't even begun to explore. And so for me, someone who's primarily interested in sort of, you know, campaigning these new ideas and new notions, I think for me personally, the games industry is a much more interesting industry. You know, despite the fact that, you know, there's also a lot of things that are frustrating about the fact that you can't do certain things as well as you may want to, but ultimately I believe we'll get to that eventually, right? Like, and so because of that, I think games is an incredible medium to work in.
Okay, thank you.
Did the girl that said yay want to ask a question herself? Yeah,
Yay.
great. Another yay.
Could you maybe tell us a little bit more about how you got to Bungie? Because I think for me and maybe a lot of the people here, being a student or an indie game developer, going from that to a AAA company seems like such a big step.
Well, I mean, like how that worked, I got an email at some point. It said like, hey.
Yeah.
So, and truthfully, like the first time I got that email, I was like, oh wow, is that in Bungie, blah, blah. And they was like, they must have sent this email by mistake. I'm probably the wrong person, right? So I didn't even respond at all. And then 3 weeks later, I got another email saying, hey, dude, like, what's going on? So anyway, but I think, you know, like, I think the real question is, like, why did I get that email, right? And
yeah.
I think that it in part comes down to what I said earlier about, like, thinking of yourself in the capacity of the person you eventually want to become, right? Like, it's what I always did is, even when I was already working at Guerrilla, was making sure that I was always sort of, you know, I spent tons of time getting my portfolio right for no real reason really, but like I felt this is what, you know, like this is something that I have to do. Because I can't really even explain specifically why I did, but I just felt like I need to do this. I need to you know, put the finishing touch on all that hard work that I did. I want to put it out there, and I care about it, right? Like I just don't want to leave it lying around. And I think it's just because of that. It's because
selling yourself.
Yeah, I think so. It's because you care about the things you do, and I firmly believe that, you know, if you do that, and if you don't shy away from, you know, the effort it takes to do things like that, you'll eventually get to be exactly where you want to be. You know, like and luck will decide how fast or how slow that process is going to be, but like eventually you'll get there. That's what I firmly believe in.
Okay, thank you.
All right, in front here is also a question. Sounds like the American dream, by the way. If you just work hard enough.
Yeah, referring back to the one scene for a sentence, or one sentence for a scene, how many sentences do you know? Or how many are there in the game?
Well, it depends on sort of what level you're talking about. Like if you talk about sort of things like architectural themes, not very many, about 4 or 5, I would say. And this is something that we very, very deliberately kept to an absolute minimum, right? Like we wanted to make sure that, you know, we worked on these simple ideas that we could build on top of. That's another thing. If you think about concept art, very often what you'll do is you'll work on a single image, but what that really represents is the start of something much more complex and multifaceted, right? Like in many cases, if you do concept art for environments, for example, what you'll find is that despite the fact that the image you're working on represents just a single, you know, hypothetical photograph of this particular environment, but what it means is that from there on, you're going to extrapolate the ideas behind that in 20 different ways. And specifically for that reason, the fact that you need to propagate it, it needs to be simple, right? Like the simplicity at the start of the process is incredibly important. If it starts as a convoluted thing that's complex and confusing, chances are you're not going to be able to make tons of variations of that idea. So.
All right, all the way in the back, there's another question.
Bungie is a massive company, as everybody knows. Obviously, with a massive company like Bungie, you have to cope with a lot of hate and criticism. How do you personally cope with that as a lead concept artist?
What do you mean by criticism?
Yeah, there's obviously like there's always, if you're talking about a massive company, there's always people gonna.
Oh, you mean the fan base?
Yeah.
Oh,
exactly,
I see. Sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, that is certainly something that it was a little bit sort of a novel aspect for me when I started working there, and it's a double-edged sword. Like on one end, it's super exciting to read, like when people love what you're doing, and then but there's also people that hate what you're doing, right? Like and they express their opinion in the most vile of ways, right? Like it's sort of uncompromising, just destroying what you've tried to so carefully sort of put together. It's tough. Like what was sort of the position I am is that I've stopped reading reviews, right? Like I don't read reviews. I actually don't need people to tell me how to improve my craft. But what I do is I do sort of read the forums, right? Like, and I do engage with players of our game. One of the things that I found very, very sort of, it was an incredibly unique experience was playing the game sort of incognito with other people, right? Like, and joining up in a raid team with 5 other guys and girls, and then hearing them talk about things they see in the game, and that's amazing. Like and this sort of ties into what Destiny was always intended to be. It was sort of this thing that, is not this one-way flow of information, right? Like we really try to, cater towards what people think is fun, and so it is imperative that we listen to the fans. But it certainly can be tough at times.
I think we can do like 2 more questions. If anyone has a question here in front.
Daar is het allemaal.
Sorry, didn't see you there. We're first going to go over there.
Hi, well, first of all, thanks. You're a huge inspiration to a lot of people, especially me. I wanted to ask you, after a certain while, all concept artists encounter art block. How do you deal with it?
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
At a certain point, all concept artists encounter art block. How do you deal with it?
Oh, effort, really. Just trying again and beat your head against the wall until it breaks, really. That really is it. Like, I think, it was actually funny, like, one of the questions that was asked to Meinert, like, how do you deal with sort of losing motivation? Like, I'm not sure how that is for you guys, but for me, it's constant frustration, right? Like, the whole process is non-stop, sort of being confronted by your own limitations and seeing how what it is you want to do doesn't really work out for you. I deal with that constantly, and the reason at some point you call your piece done is because you're just fed up with it, right? Like you can't deal with it anymore, and at some point someone says, oh yeah, sure, I get that, but like really, yeah, sort of hanging in there and not caring about the fact that you think it sucks, that is what matters, and just seeing it through. Effort, that's what it is.
Pure effort. All right, cool. I saw a question in front here. Maybe now? Yeah, cool.
When you are working on an idea for a concept, do you also think a lot about the scale of the space? Like on the picture behind, this really open and you can see the globe really much, but are there like also pieces where it was a more confined space and you were looking through a window or something?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the fun thing about working internally in a studio, because in many cases, the things you work on are going to go on top of already existing things, right? Like this would be a good example of a skybox, obviously. But in many cases, you'll also have rudimentary layouts already pre-existing, which is makes it much easier than it would have been to just design it in a vacuum. And even more so, in many cases, it actually helps tremendously to understand why certain spaces are designed the way they are, right? Like getting behind the reasoning of the designer that works on something, or the level artist, like can be super informative for your own concept and for the sort of the polish pass that's going to go on top of it. It depends on the pieces, but certainly, yeah. And if you work sort of if you work on games like that, predominantly you're going to work on spaces that have some pre-existing rudimentary version already there when you're starting.
Okay.
All right. Does anyone else have one question over there? Sorry, dude.
Yeah. First of all, really thanks for the talk. It helped me a lot, and also same with the guy over there, inspired me a lot to just keep going.
Cool.
I had a question. What do you want to do next? Next to, of course, this awesome job was a dream by itself.
I realized that like every project that I've ever worked on, I would always describe, well, this is my dream project. Really, this is really my dream project, and certainly Destiny is an even closer approximation of my ideal project. It's a good question. Like for the foreseeable future, I'll certainly be working on Destiny. You know, it was intended as a very long project, right? Like there's tons of ideas that we haven't even begun to sort of, you know, to sort of flesh out in more detail than we currently have. So after that, I don't know. Like I suppose it also depends on the state of the game industry, right? Like where are things going with that? I don't know. I think just I try not to think about that too much. Really, it's also important to, you know, think about sort of today and enjoy the sort of the day-to-day cycle, not think too much about like where do I need to be in 4 or 5 years or 10 years even.
Okay, thank you.
Cool.
All right, we have time for more questions. So if anyone else has a question, please raise your finger. Does anyone else have a question? Otherwise, I'm gonna ask questions, and that could be uncomfortable. Okay, I see a finger in the back.
Is there a difference for the audience of the concept art? Do you make concept art different for internal or for external?
Oh, we never make concept art for external parties ever. It's always
also
internal.
Nothing for publishing outside, for promoting your game, for example.
No, that's marketing art. That's a completely different sort of science all onto itself. Like the things that come into play there are incredibly different. One of the things that I think is unique to concept art is that ultimately the specific polish level of a certain image does not matter at all, right? Like the only thing that matters is the idea that the concept artist is trying to convey, is that communicated clearly enough. Now, in many cases, that will actually require a certain amount of polish, right? Like there's certain nuanced effects that you can only really sort of explain to people with a lot of effort. At the same time, actually, this image is a great example of that. Like what you see in the foreground is the crudest version of the early version of the tower. But the whole point of this image was just to say, hey, you know what? Like our skybox should look like this approximately. We should look at the traveler over there, which is that white ball in the sky. That's roughly where it needs to be. This is basically, and that is all that matters for this image. And because of that, it's really unpolished. Like the character is just like a screen grab of an early prototype. There's nothing there. Marketing art is very different, right? That's just making an image that, you know, gives a very sort of broad overview of what the product is and is going to be informed by many other teams than just art direction or the designers that work on a certain space. It's going to be marketing and Viz ID, and the publisher is going to be involved, and it's very different.
Thank you.
Right, any more questions? Over to the left, the sweet-looking gentleman with the brown hair. Mike's coming right up, sir.
So obviously you spend extraordinary amounts of time painting for Bungie. But do you still do painting as a leisure activity, like in your spare time?
Not as much as I probably should, really. But I try to, yeah. I mean, it's pretty important to not get caught up in just one train of thought, right? Like, it's tempting to let something like that that you care about so passionately, let that sort of take over your entire life. But at the same time, it's important to not shy away from the challenge of like figuring out even completely different puzzles along the side. Like I do actually think that just as an exercise, it helps you keep a fresh perspective on things. And you know, in many cases, it's also a welcome sort of deviation from what it is you work on from day to day, right? Like certainly any IP will have its limitations, like regardless of what it is you work on. There's also always things that are not appropriate at all. And so if you want to do those things, it's good to do them in your own time, just so you don't have to deal with art direction and tons of other invested parties.
All right, we're going to go on to the final question. So better be a good one over here.
Nowadays, aspiring concept artists have lots of options in terms of education. So as well as here as abroad, how would you personally, if you were a student at this moment in time, choose between those educations?
That's a really tough call. Like, I've seen the quality of the various educations increase fairly dramatically over the last few years. My knowledge of where they're at now is not sufficient to give you a very clear answer on that. Like, what I think is important is for you to realize that, like, what is ultimately going to allow me to come up with the best ideas, right? Like, not necessarily thinking about where can I learn how to draw most competently. And certainly I think, you know, game design educations are appropriate because it puts you in in sort of the mindset of a designer, right? And you think about a lot of different components than just the visuals. At the same time, I never had any design input at all during my own education at all. And what we focused on exclusively was just putting together a competent product that met the demands, right? Regardless of what those demands were. In my case, it's just like, okay, well, I just consider the designers to be another client. I can't give you a definitive answer on that, but yeah, think about that, right? Like, it's not about how well you can draw ultimately.
So to sum it up, HKU. No, I'm just kidding. No. All right, that was the question round. Thank you very much.
Awesome.